The billionaire stopped dead when he saw my ring. Drew Coleman, worth more than most countries, just froze in that hallway like he'd seen a ghost. His face went from confident to confused to something that looked like terror, all in the space of 3 seconds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where this really started. Monday morning, conference room B, when Logan Reed decided to make me the punchline of his little comedy show. "Nice ring, Hunter," Logan said, dragging out each word like he was savoring expensive wine. "Very vintage. Did you get that from a garage sale? Or maybe your grandmother's jewelry box? I'm Hunter Walsh, 47 years old, and I've been working at Pinnacle Investment Firm here in Chicago for 8 years. Senior financial analyst. Nothing fancy, but I know every number that flows through this place. That ring Logan was making fun of, I've worn it every day since my father died 11 years ago. Never took it off. Not to sleep, not to shower, not even during the week I spent at his bedside waiting for the end." The conference room went dead silent. 12 people around that polished table, and suddenly everyone found their coffee cups fascinating. Logan's dad, Ryan Reed, the VP of strategy, tried to hide his chuckle behind a cough, but we all heard it. I looked down at the ring. Simple gold, worn edges, with a faint marking most people would never notice. Then I looked back at Logan, sitting there in his $1,000 suit that Daddy bought him. "It was my father's," I said quietly. Logan leaned back in his chair, that smug expression getting wider. "Well, at least it has sentimental value. I mean, fashion-wise, it's giving medieval peasant, but hey, I respect the whole honoring the ancestors thing you've got going." A few nervous laughs around the table. Ryan Reed cleared his throat. "All right, team, let's focus on the quarterly projections." But I wasn't thinking about projections anymore. I was thinking about what was going to walk through those doors in exactly 90 minutes. Drew Coleman, our biggest client. A man who controlled more wealth than most small countries. A man who would recognize this ring the moment he saw it. Logan Reed thought he knew everything about this company. Harvard MBA, fast track to management, Daddy's golden boy, who got hired straight into a position that should have taken 10 years to earn. He talked loud in meetings, used buzzwords from textbooks, and treated support staff like they were invisible. What Logan didn't know was that I wasn't really just Hunter Walsh, mid-level analyst. My real name is Hunter Mason Walsh, and my father wasn't just any father. He was Mason Walsh, the silent financier who saved Pinnacle Investment Firm from bankruptcy in 2003 with an $850 million injection that nobody talks about anymore. The thing about old money, real old money, is that it doesn't advertise itself. My father taught me that. The minute they see you coming, he used to say, they'll try to own you. Stay invisible until you don't need to be. So I stayed invisible. For 8 years I watched and learned. I saw what this firm had become since my father's money pulled them out of the gutter. Take Logan, for instance. 3 months ago he misread an entire portfolio assessment and triggered an unauthorized trade that cost a client $180,000. Did he get fired? Nope. Ryan Reed just had accounting move numbers around and blamed it on market volatility. Or the time Logan spent a client dinner talking about his new BMW instead of investment goals, and we nearly lost a $50 million account. Again, Daddy swooped in to smooth things over. But what really got under my skin wasn't the incompetence or nepotism. It was the disrespect. The way Logan talked down to people who'd been working their whole lives. The way he treated Mrs. Patterson, our secretary, like his personal assistant. The way he made jokes about old-timers who didn't understand modern finance, and now he was making jokes about my father's ring. The meeting dragged on, budget reviews, client updates, corporate theater, but I kept checking my watch. 2:47 p.m. Drew Coleman's car would be pulling up any minute. At exactly 2:52 my phone buzzed. Text from the front desk, "Mr. Coleman is here." I stood up. "Excuse me, I need to check something in the server room." Nobody paid attention. They were used to me coming and going quietly, handling technical stuff that kept their presentations running. I walked out knowing it was the last time I'd sit in there as just another employee. The elevator dinged as I reached the executive floor. Drew Coleman stepped out and the whole hallway changed. You could feel the money, not flashy new money, but the kind that's been around so long it has its own gravity. Coleman was tall, maybe 70, with silver hair and a handmade charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He moved like someone who'd never had to ask for anything twice. I was walking toward him, carrying a manila folder, just another worker bee. We passed each other in the hallway, 6 steps, maybe 7. Then he stopped, just stopped dead, like he'd hit an invisible wall. His eyes dropped to my hand, to the ring, and his whole body went rigid. "Where did you get that?" His voice was quiet but cut through the air like a knife. I turned to face him. My father gave it to me. His face went gray. "Your father's name?" "Mason Walsh." Drew Coleman took a step back like I'd slapped him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he straightened up, and for the first time in probably 20 years, someone on this floor looked at me with respect instead of indifference. "I'll be in the conference room in 10 minutes, he said, his voice steady but different now. "Make sure you're there." I nodded and watched him walk away. His whole demeanor changed. Behind me, I could hear Ryan Reed's voice echoing from the conference room, practicing his pitch about optimizing client portfolio dynamics through strategic market positioning. He had no idea that in 10 minutes, his world was going to implode. See, that ring wasn't just a family heirloom, it was a key, a seal, proof of identity for the founding partners of a shadow investment that pulled Pinnacle back from the edge when the tech bubble burst in 2003. My father had demanded only one thing in return for his $850 million, complete anonymity. No contracts, no paper trail, just a gentleman's agreement sealed with a handshake and protected by blood. But he'd also insisted on one fail-safe. If his heir ever came forward, if they ever presented the ring to Drew Coleman, then the original founding agreement would be activated. The silent partnership would become very, very loud. I walked back to the conference room where Ryan Reed was finishing his presentation about quarterly growth targets. Logan was sitting there scrolling through his phone, probably updating his Instagram with a selfie from the executive conference room, the same room where his little comedy routine was about to backfire spectacularly. So in conclusion, Ryan was saying, our client retention metrics show a sustained upward trajectory that aligns perfectly with our core competency expansion initiatives. Pure corporate nonsense. The kind of buzzword soup that sounds impressive to people who don't actually understand the numbers. But I understood them. I'd been tracking every metric Ryan mentioned for the past 8 years, and half of what he was saying was creative accounting at best. Drew Coleman entered at exactly 3:02. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Ryan immediately went into full corporate grovel mode, standing up, straightening his tie, launching into his prepared speech about market penetration and client satisfaction metrics. Coleman held up one finger. Everything stopped. He walked straight to where I was sitting, second row, off to the side where the support staff usually sat. Every head in that room turned to follow him. Logan looked confused. Ryan looked panicked. The other executives started shifting in their chairs like they suddenly realized they were sitting in the wrong seats. Coleman stopped in front of my chair. The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who owned senators and bought countries as tax write-offs, "I'd like you all to meet Hunter Mason Walsh." The silence was deafening. I could hear the air conditioning humming, someone's coffee cup being set down too carefully, the faint sound of traffic 35 floors below. His father, Mason Walsh, is the reason this firm still exists. In 2003, when you were about to lose everything, Mason Walsh quietly provided the capital that saved your company. No publicity, no board seat, no recognition. Just $850 million and a handshake. Ryan Reed's face went from red to white to green in the span of about 5 seconds. Logan's mouth fell open so wide you could have parked a truck in it. The other executives were looking around like they'd suddenly found themselves in the wrong movie. Coleman continued, his eyes never leaving mine. The agreement was simple. Complete anonymity in exchange for a silent founding partnership. But there was one condition. If Mason's heir ever came forward, if they ever identified themselves with the family seal, he gestured toward my ring, then the partnership would be revealed. He turned to address the room. "This man has been working among you for 8 years, watching, learning, evaluating whether this firm deserved the legacy his father provided." Logan found his voice first, because of course he did. "Wait. This is crazy. He's just Hunter from Financial Analysis." "Financial Analysis," I corrected quietly. "And Logan, remember that portfolio mistake you made 3 months ago? The one that cost Mr. Peterson $180,000? I flagged it before you submitted it. You ignored the warning because it came from someone you considered beneath you. Ryan Reed tried to take control. Now hold on. Let's not air internal matters in front of... Coleman cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell. Mr. Reed, your son just insulted the heir to your founding partner, the son of the man who saved your job, your company, and your reputation. He paused. I think some internal matters need airing. I stood up slowly. 8 years of watching incompetence rewarded and arrogance celebrated, all leading to this moment. I didn't come here for revenge, I said, looking around the room. I came to observe, to see what this place had become, to understand if it still deserved my father's investment and his trust. I looked directly at Logan. You want to know what I learned? I learned that some people inherit position without earning respect. Some people mistake privilege for competence, and some people think making fun of someone's family legacy is just another day at the office. Logan tried to laugh it off. Come on, it was just a joke. I didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked, I interrupted. In 8 years working here, you never once asked anyone about their background, their story, their family. You just assumed that if someone wasn't in your circle, they weren't worth knowing. Drew Coleman's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened even more, if that was possible. I just received confirmation, he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. My fund is pulling all accounts from this firm, effective immediately. That's $2.8 billion walking out the door. Ryan Reed collapsed into his chair like someone had cut his strings. Mr. Coleman, please, if there's been some misunderstanding. Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right, Coleman said, his voice like ice. You understood that you were running a meritocracy, but you were actually running a nepotism factory. You understood that you were serving your clients, but you were actually serving yourselves. He turned back to me. Mr. Walsh, I believe your father would be very interested to know what his investment has been supporting all these years. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. I'd been carrying it for 8 years, waiting for this moment. Actually, Mr. Coleman, my father left very specific instructions about what to do if I ever had to reveal myself. The envelope was thick ivory parchment, sealed with red wax, the same seal that was on my ring. I handed it to Coleman, and you could hear people holding their breath as he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. He read silently for a moment, his expression getting darker with each line. Then he looked up with something that might have been a smile if his face had been capable of that expression. According to this, Coleman said, addressing the room, Mason Walsh's final instruction was simple. If his son ever had to step forward because of disrespect or incompetence, then the partnership would be dissolved and all founding investments would be returned to the Walsh Family Trust. The room erupted, not in noise, but in the kind of shocked silence that happens when people realize their world just ended. I could see calculators going off in everyone's heads. $850 million plus 20 years of compound interest would bankrupt the firm 3 times over. Ryan Reed found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. You can't be serious. That would destroy everything we've built. Should have thought of that before you raised a son who mocks his benefactors, Coleman replied. Logan finally spoke up, his voice shaky. Wait, Dad? What's he talking about? What founding investments? Ryan Reed's face went ashen. He'd never told his son the real story. Logan had no idea that the company he'd been treating like his personal playground was only standing because of the man he'd just humiliated. But I held up my hand before anyone else could speak. Actually, there's another option. Everyone leaned forward like their lives depended on it, which, honestly, they probably did. My father also provided for the possibility of redemption. If the firm could prove it was willing to operate on merit rather than privilege, the partnership could continue under new management. The relief in the room was palpable, but it didn't last long. I looked directly at Ryan Reed. You're fired. Effective immediately. Ryan's jaw dropped. You can't fire me. I'm a VP. I have contracts, severance agreements. Your contracts are with Pinnacle Investment Firm, Coleman interrupted, which exists at the pleasure of the Walsh Family Trust. Mr. Walsh, as the heir to the founding partnership, has full authority to restructure management as he sees fit. I turned to Logan, who was looking around the room like he expected someone to come to his rescue. Logan, you're fired too. Clear out your offices. Logan jumped up, his face red with fury. "You can't do this. My dad's the VP. I have rights. This is illegal." "Your dad was the VP," I corrected. "And the only right you have is to leave quietly or be escorted out by security." As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Coleman had apparently made some calls during our little meeting. "This isn't over, Hunter," Logan snarled as the guards moved toward him. "You think you're so smart hiding who you are for 8 years? That's fraud. I'll sue you for everything you've got." I met his eyes calmly. "Logan, I never lied about who I was. I just never told you the whole truth. There's a difference. And as for suing me for everything I've got," I gestured around the room, "I think you're going to find that's more than you bargained for." Ryan Reed was sputtering, making threats about wrongful termination and lawsuits, but nobody was listening anymore. The other executives were too busy trying to figure out how to save their own careers. As the security guards escorted the Reeds toward the door, Logan turned back one last time. "You're going to regret this, Walsh. Nobody treats my family this way." "Actually," I said quietly, "somebody just did." After they were gone, the remaining executives started talking all at once. Plans for damage control, strategies for winning back Coleman's trust, ideas about restructuring and new leadership. The usual corporate panic response. But Coleman held up his hand for silence. "Gentlemen, ladies, there's one more matter to discuss." He turned to me with something that might have been respect in his eyes. "Mr. Walsh, the board would like to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer, with full authority over all investment strategies and complete restructuring powers." The room held its breath. This was it. The moment every underdog dreams about. Complete power, total control, the chance to run everything exactly the way I thought it should be run. I looked around at all those faces, some hopeful, some terrified, all of them suddenly seeing me in a completely different light. These were the same people who'd ignored me in meetings, forgotten my name at office parties, and treated me like part of the furniture for 8 years. "Thank you for the offer," I said slowly. But no, you could have heard a pin drop. Several people's mouths actually fell open. "No?" someone repeated like they couldn't process the word. I stood up slowly, straightening my tie. I didn't reveal myself to collect power. I revealed myself to expose the truth. This company forgot what respect looks like. It forgot that competence matters more than connections. It forgot that treating people well isn't just good manners. It's good business. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline, all those buildings full of people just trying to do their jobs and be treated with basic human dignity. My father built his fortune by recognizing talent wherever he found it and treating every person with respect. This firm has spent 8 years doing the opposite. Coleman nodded slowly, and I could see something, like understanding in his eyes. "So what happens now?" he asked. I turned back to the room. "Now you prove you've learned something. You promote based on merit. You treat people with respect regardless of their last name or their college connections. You remember that every employee, from the mail clerk to the CEO, deserves basic human dignity." I headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and you might want to promote Sarah Martinez from junior analyst to senior analyst. She's been doing Logan's job for the past year while he took credit for her work." As I walked toward the elevator, I heard Coleman say, "I'll be conducting quarterly reviews personally to ensure these changes are implemented, and Ms. Martinez will indeed be receiving that promotion, effective immediately." The elevator doors closed behind me, and for the first time in 8 years, I felt like I could breathe properly. I rode down to my floor and started cleaning out my desk. Word travels fast in a place like this, and people were already staring, whispering, trying to process what had happened. Some looked scared, wondering if more firings were coming. Some looked confused, still trying to wrap their heads around the idea that quiet Hunter Walsh was actually the heir to a fortune. And a few, the good ones, the ones who'd been overlooked and undervalued for years, looked hopeful. Sarah Martinez appeared at my cubicle while I was packing up my few personal items. "Mr. Walsh, is it true? About your father and the company?" "It's true, Sarah." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Are you really leaving after all this?" "I am." "But why? You could run this place. You could make it better." I looked at her, smart, hardworking, Someone who'd been passed over for promotion after promotion while people like Logan got fast-tracked based on connections rather than competence. Sarah, you don't need me to make this place better. You need to make it better. You and people like you. The ones who actually care about doing good work and treating people right. She nodded, though I could see she didn't entirely understand. Thank you for what you said up there about my work. You earned that recognition years ago. I just made sure the right people finally heard about it. As I finished packing, I thought about my father, about the lessons he'd taught me, about patience and observation and the difference between justice and revenge. He'd always said that the measure of a man wasn't in what he inherited, but in what he did with it. I'd inherited more than money. I'd inherited principles. And sometimes living by those principles means walking away from everything, even when you could stay and rule it all. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Well played. Your father would be proud. The firm will be under close supervision. Real change is coming. D. Coleman. I smiled and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Then I did something I hadn't done in 11 years. I took off my father's ring. The metal was warm from years of contact with my skin, and the faint markings on the band caught the light one last time. I looked at it for a long moment, remembering the day my father had slipped it onto my finger as he lay dying in that hospital bed. Promise me, he'd whispered, his voice barely audible. Promise me you'll make sure they remember where they came from. I'd kept that promise. Now it was time to let go. I walked over to Sarah's desk where she was already working on what looked like a comprehensive analysis of client portfolios, probably trying to clean up more of Logan's messes. Sarah, I said quietly. She looked up and I placed the ring on her desk. When the new management team asks who should be in charge of rebuilding the company culture, show them this. Tell them it came from someone who believed in merit over privilege. Her eyes went wide. Mr. Walsh, I can't take this. It's your family. It's done its job, I said. Now it's your turn to carry the message forward. I picked up my box of personal items and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear the sound of real change beginning. People were talking about the promotion Sarah had just received. Someone mentioned that they'd heard Coleman was bringing in an entirely new management team. Another voice said something about reviewing all hiring practices to eliminate nepotism. The security guard at the front desk nodded as I walked past. Have a good day, Mr. Walsh. You too, Miguel. He looked surprised that I knew his name, but I'd made it my business to know everyone's name over the past 8 years. Miguel had 3 kids and worked a second job on weekends to pay for his daughter's college tuition. He deserved to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be treated with respect. As I walked out into the Chicago afternoon, I felt my phone buzz again. This time it was a text from Sarah. I won't let you down. I smiled and typed back, I know you won't. The street was busy with the usual afternoon traffic, people heading home from work or rushing to meetings or grabbing coffee. Normal people living normal lives, most of them probably working for bosses who didn't appreciate them and in companies that didn't value their contributions. But maybe that would start to change. Maybe what happened at Pinnacle would ripple outward. Maybe other people would start demanding better treatment, better leadership, better recognition of their worth. I walked past the coffee shop where I'd grabbed my morning caffeine for 8 years, past the newsstand where I'd bought papers I never had time to read, past all the familiar landmarks of a life I was leaving behind. There were other companies out there, other places where good people were being overlooked while the privileged collected rewards they hadn't earned. Other Logan Reeds who needed to be reminded that respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And I had all the time in the world to find them. The ring was gone, but the message lived on. Sometimes the best victory isn't taking control. It's showing people what they need to control themselves. My father would have been proud.